The Arizona sun doesn't just warm you, it bakes the truth right out of your bones, leaving nothing but dust and secrets. For Beatrice Holland, that dust tasted like a lie she was about to live for the rest of her life. She was riding in a clattering stagecoach, heading for the most feared place in the territory, Stone Creek Ranch, and she was promised to the man who ran it, a man known only in whispers. They called him the Apache. He was expecting his bride, a delicate little thing whose picture he kept on his mantle, a porcelain doll named Clara May. But Clara May was gone. She'd chosen love over a deal made in a dark, smoky room 1,000 miles away, leaving Beatrice to take her place. And with every turn of the wheels, a single, terrifying question hammered in her skull. What does a man who tamed the wilderness do to a woman who lies to his face? The stagecoach smelled like stale whiskey and fear. Beatrice felt the grit of the Arizona dust coat her tongue, a fitting punishment for the sin she was committing. Beside her, her cousin Clara May was a ghost, her fancy silk dress a joke against the cracked leather seat. They were 2 days from a town called Redemption. Redemption felt like a slap in the face. There would be no redemption for Beatrice, only consequences. I can't do it, Bea, Clara whispered, her voice about to snap. She wasn't clutching a picture of her fiancé, the rancher Jedediah Stone. She was clutching a picture of a poet back in St. Louis. You have to, Beatrice said, her own voice a cold, hard thing. Think of the debts. The Thompson family fortune was gone, vanished like a mirage. Jedediah Stone, a man who had carved an empire out of rock and blood, was their only way out. He wanted a wife from a good family. He wanted an heir. He'd seen a picture of blonde, willowy Clara May, and he'd paid a fortune for her. The contract was signed, the deal was done. He's a savage, Clara hissed, her knuckles white. They say he lived with the tribes. They call him the Apache. They say he's more beast than man. Beatrice had heard the rumors. A silent giant with eyes that could see into your soul. A man who bought a wife like he'd buy a prize bull at auction. She tried to soothe her cousin, but the story scared her too. Beatrice was everything Clara was not. She was sturdy, not slender. Her hair was brown, not gold. Her hands were for working, not for waving a fan. She was solid earth. Clara was flighty air. Then they stopped to change the horses, and the world fell apart. The air outside was like a furnace blast. As Beatrice stepped down, Clara grabbed her arm, her grip like a vice. I won't be his broodmare, she declared, her voice cracking with hysteria. I love Samuel. He's waiting for me to come back. Beatrice stared at her. Come back? There is no back, Clara. Your father will be ruined, thrown in prison. Tears cut clean tracks through the dust on Clara's cheeks. I don't care. I'm leaving. Leaving to where? Beatrice demanded. We're in the middle of nowhere. You have no money, no plan. Clara's eyes darted to a lanky stable boy. He's heading east in the morning. He'll take me. She pulled out a tiny pearl-handled derringer. I sold this to him. The betrayal was a punch to the gut. Clara had saved herself and damned everyone else. Beatrice's mind raced. There was no time. No way to explain this to a man like Jedediah Stone. He would see it as a broken contract, a deep insult. He would crush what was left of their family. And in that moment, a wild, desperate idea took root. She looked at her cousin, then at herself. They were about the same height, in a dim ranch house to a man who'd only seen a faded photograph. Maybe, just maybe, he had paid for a Thompson bride, and by God, he was going to get one. Give me your dress, Beatrice said, her voice hollow. Clara stared. What? Your dress, your ring, your papers, everything. Beatrice's gaze was hard as flint. You want to run? Fine, but you won't destroy your family. I will go to Stone Creek. I will be Clara May Thompson. The deal hung between them in the shimmering heat. For Clara, it was a miracle. For Beatrice, it was a life sentence. Inside a grimy way station room, they became different people. Clara's fine blue silk was painfully tight across Beatrice's shoulders. Beatrice's sturdy brown suit hung on Clara like a sack. They swapped luggage, papers, and the simple ring Jedediah Stone had sent. When Clara slipped out to meet the stable boy, she didn't look back. She left Beatrice Holland standing alone in a stolen dress and a borrowed name, waiting for the wagon that would take her into the heart of a lie, and into the hands of the man they called the Apache. The final leg of the journey wasn't in a coach. It was a buckboard wagon, driven by a man whose face was tanned leather and suspicion. He called himself Gus, the foreman. He said almost nothing. His silence was a heavy, watchful thing. His eyes flicked from Beatrice to a photograph he pulled from his pocket, then back to Beatrice. The photograph of Clara. A flicker of confusion crossed his face before he buried it. "You look healthier than your picture, ma'am," was all he said. Beatrice's heart pounded. Travel agrees with me. The land was beautiful and brutal. Red rock towers clawed at the sky. Giant cacti stood like silent guards. But it was a hard land, an unforgiving land, a land that demanded strength. Stone Creek Ranch wasn't a ranch, it was a fortress. It sat in a wide valley, a fast-running creek cutting through it like a vein of silver. The main house was long and low, made of thick adobe and dark timber. It was built to survive, and he was waiting on the porch. The rumors hadn't been wrong, they just hadn't been enough. He was taller than she'd imagined, bigger. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and his skin was burned brown by the sun. But it was his face. It looked like it was carved from the same rock as the mountains around them. And his eyes. They were a pale, piercing gray, the color of a winter sky, and they saw everything. He didn't smile as Gus helped her down. His gaze wasn't cruel. It was analytical, like he was judging livestock. It swept over her, taking in the ill-fitting dress, her flushed cheeks, the sturdy line of her shoulders. "You are not what I expected," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Beatrice's palms were slick with sweat. "The photograph was taken years ago. I've filled out." A muscle worked in his jaw. "So I see." He gestured to the door. "Gus will see to your luggage. Maria will show you to your room. We dine at sundown." And then he turned and walked inside, leaving her alone on the porch with the crushing weight of his disapproval. The house was cold. The room she was shown to was Spartan, the furniture heavy and dark. There wasn't even a mirror. A small mercy, she thought. Dinner was agony. They sat at opposite ends of a table long enough for 20 men. The silence was his weapon, and he wielded it with terrifying skill. He ate with a focused, economic motion, never looking up, never speaking. Beatrice felt like she was screaming. She had to say something. "The ranch is very large," she managed, her voice sounding small and stupid. He looked up then, his gray eyes pinning her to her chair. "It is." "The creek is lovely," she tried again. "It is the reason I am alive," he replied, his tone chilling, "and the reason my enemies are not." The conversation died. After the meal he stood. "I have work. Maria will fetch what you need. Your room connects to mine through a dressing room. The circuit judge will marry us on Saturday." He stated it like a fact, a transaction. He had paid for a wife. On Saturday he would take delivery. Left alone, a profound isolation washed over her. He wasn't a fool. He knew. He knew she wasn't the girl in the picture. The only question was when he would call her on the lie, and what he would do to her when he did. She went to her room and slipped into her own simple nightdress. It was the only piece of her true self she had left. The bed was a massive four-poster, built like a fortress, solid, unyielding. She fell into a fitful sleep, her dreams filled with piercing gray eyes and the silent judgment of the Arizona desert. She was a fraud, an imposter, and she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The first few days were a quiet hell. She tried to make herself useful, but the housekeeper, Maria, a stern woman with eyes as dark and hard as her employer's, silently blocked her at every turn. The ranch hands tipped their hats, but their eyes were filled with suspicion. They were Jedediah's men, and she was an outsider. Jedediah himself was a ghost, gone before sunrise, back long after dark. Their only contact was the silent, agonizing ritual of dinner. He never asked about her past. She didn't dare ask about his. She was living on a razor's edge, just waiting for the fall. The night before the wedding, a storm broke over the mountains. Lightning tore the sky apart. Thunder shook the house to its foundations. Sleep was impossible. She lay in the massive bed, listening to the rain, thinking about the man in the next room. A man who looked at her like she was a line item in a ledger. A man who knew something was wrong, but was going through with it anyway. Why? Did he just not care who she was, as long as she could give him a son? The thought made her sick. The storm passed just before dawn. Exhausted, she finally drifted off. She woke with a start. The room was still dark. She had overslept on her wedding day. She sat up, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. And that's when it happened. Not a loud crack, but a sickening, splintering groan. A sound of old wood finally giving up. The right side of the massive bed frame tilted violently. With a final percussive crunch, the headboard collapsed and the entire mattress slumped to the floor, taking Beatrice with it in a heap of sheets and blankets. She just lay there, stunned, tangled in the bedding, mortified. She had broken the bed, the fortress, the one solid thing in her life. The door to the dressing room flew open. Jedediah Stone stood there, a lamp held high. He was wearing only trousers, his chest and shoulders bare in the lamplight. He looked like a mountain god. His eyes, wide with alarm, took in the scene. The shattered bed frame, the splintered wood, and Beatrice tangled on the floor. She braced for the explosion, the rage, the accusation. This was it, the end of the lie. But Jedediah didn't yell. The alarm in his eyes was replaced by something else, something unreadable. He walked into the room, raising the lamp. He knelt, not looking at her, but at the broken leg of the bed. He ran a hand over the splintered wood. "Dry rot," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Figured as much. This bed was my grandfather's. The timber wasn't cured properly." He finally looked at her, and for the first time Beatrice saw the ghost of a smile touch the corners of his mouth. It wasn't mean. It was amusement. "Appears you found the weak spot," he said. Beatrice was speechless. She had expected fury. Instead, this quiet man was kneeling on the floor, calmly diagnosing the structural failure of his antique bed. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gray eyes searching her face. "No," she whispered. "Only my pride." He grunted, a sound that might have been a laugh. He stood and extended a hand. It was large and calloused. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, and he pulled her to her feet with an effortless strength that stole her breath. They stood there for a moment, his hand still holding hers, the lamplight throwing dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with a new energy. "There's a guest room at the end of the hall," he said, finally releasing her. "I'll have the boys haul this out after sunrise." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, his back to her. "My grandmother," he said, "was a formidable woman. She claimed my grandfather built this bed to contain her spirit." He looked over his shoulder. "Looks like she finally won." And then he was gone. Beatrice stood in the ruined room, her heart pounding a strange, uneven rhythm. The broken bed was a disaster, but it had shattered more than just wood. It had shattered the suffocating silence. Faced with this absurd little crisis, Jedediah hadn't reacted with anger. He'd reacted with practicality, concern, and a flicker of humor she never would have imagined. For the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, Beatrice Holland felt a sliver of hope. Maybe this new life wasn't built on unforgiving stone after all. Maybe, just like the old bed, it had its own hidden weaknesses and its own potential to be rebuilt into something stronger. The wedding was as cold as she'd expected. The circuit judge smelled of stale cigars. Gus and Maria were the witnesses. Jedediah stood beside her, silent, his vows a low rumble. The simple gold band felt like a shackle on her finger. Beatrice Stone. The name felt like a costume. Life on the ranch went on, but something had changed. The silence between them wasn't so heavy anymore. At dinner, he would sometimes talk about the ranch, a wolf pack getting too close to the north pasture, the price of cattle in Tucson. It wasn't conversation, but it was something. He let her stay in the guest room. He made no demands on her as a husband, and for that, she was grateful. It gave her space to breathe, to watch. She started walking the grounds, learning the names of the horses, the faces of the hands. She saw how Jedediah ran his empire. He was hard, but he was fair. He worked longer than any of his men. The respect they had for him was absolute. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. It was on one of those walks that she met the snake. A rider approached, not one of the ranch hands. He rode a magnificent black horse and was dressed in fine town clothes. He was handsome, with a charming smile that didn't reach his dark, clever eyes. "Mrs. Stone, I presume," he said, sweeping off his hat. "Silas Kane. A pleasure." Beatrice had heard the name. Gus had spit it like a curse. Kane owned the neighboring ranch. "Mr. Kane," she replied coolly. "I trust our reclusive Jedediah is treating you well," Kane said, his smile oily. It was a shock, hearing he'd sent for a bride. "We all assumed he was married to this land." "My husband is a good man," she said, surprised to find she meant it. "Oh, of course," Kane said smoothly. "A powerful man. A man who gets what he wants. Land, water, cattle, and now a beautiful wife for his collection." The words were meant to sound like a compliment, but they landed like an insult. He was reducing her to a possession. "If you'll excuse me," she said, turning to leave. "Allow me," he insisted, dismounting and walking beside her. "You know," he said casually, "this very creek is a point of contention. An old surveyor's map shows it originates on my property. A technicality, of course. The threat was clear. The creek was the lifeblood of Stone Creek. To control its source was to hold a knife to Jedediah's throat." "I know nothing of maps," Beatrice said. "You'll have to speak to my husband." Kane chuckled. "Oh, I have. He's not a man for negotiation. He sees the world in black and white. What is his, and what he intends to take. You'd be wise to remember that." When they reached the house, Jedediah was on the porch cleaning a rifle. He looked up. His face hardened into a mask of pure granite. The air crackled with hatred. "Kane," Jedediah said, his voice flat. "Stone," Kane replied with a mock bow. "Just welcoming your lovely bride to the neighborhood." "My wife knows who her neighbors are," Jedediah said, his gray eyes locked on Kane. "And she knows which ones to trust." The two men stared each other down, a silent war in the shimmering heat. Kane broke first. "A pleasure, Mrs. Stone," he said, tipping his hat before riding away. Beatrice turned back to Jedediah. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was low and hard. "Stay away from him," he ordered. "He is a snake. He smiles while he sinks his fangs in." That night, Beatrice couldn't sleep. She wandered into Jedediah's study. The room smelled of leather, tobacco, and him. On his desk, she saw a letter from a law firm in Tucson. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and her blood ran cold. It was about water rights and land claims filed by Silas Kane. It mentioned fraudulent documents and paid witnesses. Kane wasn't just making threats. He was actively trying to steal their water, to destroy them. Later, from the shadows of the hallway, she heard Jedediah talking with Gus on the porch. "He's damming the upper fork," Gus said. "Just a trickle for now. But he's testing you, Jed. He thinks this new wife has made you soft." There was a long pause. "She's not a distraction," Jedediah said finally, and his voice held a quiet, fierce defensiveness. "She's different." Beatrice retreated to her room, her heart pounding. The whispers in the dust were turning into a roar. A human serpent was coiling in the shadows, ready to strike. And she, the imposter, felt a fierce, unexpected surge of protectiveness for this ranch. And for the silent, complicated man who was her husband. The trouble started with a single steer, stumbling and sick. Within a day, 3 more were down. By the end of the week, a dozen of Jedediah's prize cattle were afflicted. They wouldn't eat. A foul foam frothed at their mouths. Panic spread through the ranch. This herd was Jedediah's life's work. Losing it would be catastrophic. They suspected poison. They suspected Cain. But they couldn't find any proof. The water was clean. The feed was untainted. An invisible enemy was destroying them from the inside out. Jedediah grew more silent, more withdrawn. The small cracks that had formed in the wall between them began to seal up again. One afternoon, Beatrice brought sandwiches and water out to the quarantine pens. The stench of sickness was overwhelming. Jedediah and Gus were examining a strange weed that had sprung up in patches near the pens. It had small, pretty purple flowers. Never seen this before, Gus was saying. Beatrice stopped. A memory flickered. A summer spent with her great-aunt in Ohio. An herbalist. A healer. She knew that plant. It's called black knapweed, she said, her voice clear. Both men turned and stared at her. The flowers are harmless, she continued, stepping closer. But the roots are toxic. It doesn't kill quickly. It builds up inside them, causes sores in the mouth, and eventually their insides just stop working. Jedediah stared, his eyes narrowed. How do you know this? My great-aunt taught me about plants, she said. She looked at the sick cattle. Are their tongues swollen? Covered in sores? Gus nodded slowly, like they've been chewing on thorns. It's the knapweed, she said with certainty. A plan built from old lessons bloomed in her mind. There's a remedy, but we have to work fast. We need to brew a drench. Willow bark for the pain, yarrow for the fever, and charcoal to absorb the poison. Gus looked at Jedediah, desperation warring with disbelief. Jedediah's gaze was fixed on Beatrice. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, not as the fragile girl from the picture, but as someone else entirely. Show me, he said. For the next 2 days, the ranch became her apothecary. She led the men to the creek bed, pointing out the willow trees and the feathery leaves of yarrow. Maria, her stern face finally cracking with respect, gave Beatrice free rein in the kitchen, the house filled with the sharp, medicinal scent of the brewing drench. Beatrice worked like a woman possessed. Her fancy dress was forgotten. She rolled up her sleeves and ground charcoal with a stone pestle. Her hands became stained and blistered. For the first time since she arrived, she wasn't playing a part. She was herself. Administering the drench was dangerous, messy work. They started with the sickest bull, a massive, formidable beast. Jedediah and Gus roped it, pulling its head back. Beatrice approached with a bottle of the dark brew, her heart hammering. Easy now, Jedediah murmured, not to the bull, but to her. He stood right beside her, a solid, reassuring wall. She took a deep breath, pried the bull's mouth open, and poured the medicine down its throat. They worked from sunrise to sunset. That night, Beatrice collapsed into bed, every muscle screaming, too exhausted to dream. On the third morning, she woke to a strange silence. She rushed outside. Jedediah was standing by the quarantine pen, his back to her, perfectly still. Her stomach plummeted. It hadn't worked. They were all dead. She came to stand beside him, dreading what she would see. The big bull was on its feet. It was drinking slowly from the water trough. 2 other cows were standing, chewing their cud. They were still weak, but they were alive. They were getting better. Relief so profound it made her dizzy washed over her. Jedediah turned. The exhaustion was still etched on his face, but something else was there too. A deep, raw, unguarded respect. You saved them, he said. It wasn't a thank you. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a sense of wonder. He looked down at her hands. Those are not the hands of a society lady. Beatrice looked at her own hands. The calluses, the scratches, the dirt. She felt no shame. She lifted her chin and met his gaze. No, she said, her voice clear and strong. They are not. He held her gaze for a long moment, and in the quiet space between them, the last remnants of the lie she was living seemed to turn to dust. He wasn't looking at Clara Mae Thompson. He was looking at Beatrice Stone, his wife, a woman of a different and far more valuable kind of strength. Everything changed after that. The ranch hands who had been suspicious now greeted her with genuine warmth. Gus started asking for her opinion. Maria saved her the best cuts of meat. She had earned her place, not with a contract, but with courage. The change in Jedediah was even deeper. The silence between them became comfortable. He started to talk to her, really talk. He shared his plans, his fears, his deep love for this harsh, beautiful land. He told her stories of his youth, of the years he spent alone in the mountains. He never said the word love, but she saw it in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, in the rare wildflowers he'd leave on her pillow. She was falling for this silent, complicated man, but the guilt of her deception was always there, a bitter poison, a wall between them. The final confrontation came as she knew it would. in the form of Silas Kane. A rider came galloping into the yard, his face pale with panic. "Fire! The North Fork Canyon is on fire!" The canyon was dry as a bone. A fire there, with the wind blowing south, could wipe out the entire ranch in hours. "Kane!" Jedediah snarled, his face like thunder. Within minutes, every man was saddled up, riding hard toward the pillar of smoke in the north. "Stay in the house, lock the doors," Jedediah ordered Beatrice, his hand gripping her arm for a tight second, before he spurred his horse and vanished into the dust. Beatrice's heart pounded. The fire was a diversion. Kane was making his move. But for what? The ranch was empty, vulnerable. Just then, she saw two riders approaching from the direction of town. One was the post rider, waving a letter. The other was Silas Kane. He had a triumphant, predatory smirk on his face. "A special delivery, Mrs. Stone," Kane called out, dismounting and striding onto the porch as if he owned it. He took the letter from the nervous post rider and held it out to her. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, achingly familiar. It was from Clara May. "It seems your little charade is over," Kane said, his voice dripping with malice. "My man in the St. Louis Telegraph office is very efficient. He alerted me when a certain Samuel Price bought 2 train tickets west for himself and a Mrs. Price, formerly known as Clara May Thompson. I imagine this letter confirms the details." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. It was over. "What do you want, Kane?" "What I've always wanted," he said, his eyes sweeping over the ranch. "This valley, this water, all of it. Jedediah is a stubborn fool, but when he learns his marriage is a sham, his authority will be shattered. His men will see him as a man duped by a plain, desperate spinster. Every word was a poisoned dart. He was right. The humiliation would destroy Jedediah." From the north, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Jedediah was coming back. "Seems the fire was smaller than reported," Kane sneered. "No matter. This will be far more entertaining." Jedediah galloped into the yard, his face smudged with soot, his eyes blazing. He took in the scene at a glance. Kane on his porch, the letter in Beatrice's hand, the terror on her face. "Get off my land, Kane," he growled. "Not before we clear a few things up," Kane said, his voice loud enough for the returning ranch hands to hear. "It seems you've been the victim of a rather clever deception, Stone. You sent for the lovely Clara May Thompson, did you not?" He gestured dramatically at Beatrice. "But this is not her. This is her cousin, a common woman named Beatrice Holland. You've been swindled. Your marriage is a fraud." A stunned silence fell over the yard. The hands stared, their mouths open. Gus's face was a thundercloud of betrayal. Beatrice looked at Jedediah, her heart breaking. She saw the shock in his eyes, then a flicker of pain so profound it stole her breath. This was the moment she had dreaded, the truth revealed in the cruelest way possible. Jedediah stood perfectly still. The entire world held its breath. He looked at Beatrice's face, at her tear-filled eyes. He saw the guilt, the fear, the shame. He saw the lie. Then he did something no one expected. He slowly, deliberately walked past Silas Kane and stood directly in front of Beatrice. He gently took the unopened letter from her trembling fingers, and without looking at it, he tore it in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the ground. He turned to face Kane, his massive frame shielding Beatrice from view. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, deadly calm. "Her name," he said, each word a chip of ice, "is Beatrice Stone. She is my wife. She saved my herd. She has more courage in her little finger than you have in your entire worthless body. This is her home, and the only fraud I see here is the man who sets fires and forges land claims because he's too cowardly to build something of his own." He took a step forward. "You made 2 mistakes today, Kane. The first was setting fire to my land." His gray eyes glinted like steel. "The second was insulting my wife." Before Kane could react, Jedediah's fist shot out. The fight was short and brutal. Jedediah moved with cold, efficient violence. He didn't just beat Silas Kane. He dismantled him, leaving him a bleeding wreck in the dirt. "Get him off my land," Jedediah ordered his stunned men. "And if he ever sets foot on Stone Creek again, shoot him." As two hands hauled Cain away, Jedediah turned back to Beatrice. The fury was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. The entire ranch was watching. Without a word, he took her by the arm and led her inside the silent house. The truth was out, and the real reckoning was about to begin. Inside the parlor, the silence was suffocating. Jedediah released her arm and walked to the stone fireplace, resting his forehead against the cool rock, his back to her. "It's true," she whispered, the words like ash in her mouth. Everything he said. "My name is Beatrice Holland. Clara ran away. Her family would have been ruined. I took her place." The confession tumbled out, a torrent of shame. "I am so sorry, Jedediah. I know you must hate me." He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't reply. When he finally turned, his face was weary but not with the cold fury she expected. "Hate you?" he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Beatrice, did you truly think I didn't know?" She stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" "That first day," he continued, walking slowly toward her, "when you stepped off that buckboard, I knew you weren't the woman in the photograph. The picture was of a girl who looked like she'd be frightened by her own shadow. You, you looked at this place, at me, and you weren't frightened. You were defiant." He stopped in front of her. "I didn't know the why. I assumed the family had sent the stronger sister instead of the prettier one. My pride was stung, but I was also intrigued." He reached out and gently touched her cheek. "I watched you. You didn't cower. You met my silence with your own strength. And then you broke my grandfather's damn bed." A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I saw the truth of you that night. And then, with the cattle, I saw your heart. I saw the woman you truly are. A healer, a fighter, a partner." Tears streamed down Beatrice's face. "But the contract, the deception, the contract was for a wife," he said softly, "a woman to share this life with. I thought I was getting a fragile doll I would have to protect. Instead, I got a woman who protects me. I stopped caring what your name was weeks ago. I only care that you are here." He pulled her into his arms and she buried her face in his chest, sobbing with a relief so immense it was painful. He held her tightly, stroking her hair, murmuring her real name. Beatrice. It sounded like a prayer. In the days that followed, the last shadows between them vanished. They talked for hours, sharing the truths of their lives. He confessed his own profound loneliness, the isolation of being the feared Apache of Stone Creek. She confessed her fears of being overlooked, of being deemed too plain, too practical. They were two lonely souls who had found each other through a lie, only to discover a deeper truth. Silas Kane was finished. Word of his treachery and his humiliating defeat spread through the territory. With legal proof of his fraud, Jedediah ensured Kane's reputation was shattered. He was forced to sell his ranch and leave in disgrace. One morning, about a month later, Beatrice awoke to the sound of hammering. She looked out the window and saw Jedediah in the morning sun, working with focused intensity. He was planing long, thick planks of golden oak. She went outside with a mug of coffee. "What are you doing?" He looked up, his face breaking into a rare, full smile that made her heart ache with love. "What does it look like?" "I'm building us a new bed." He ran his hand over the smooth, solid wood. "No dry rot in this one. A solid foundation, built to last a lifetime." His eyes met hers, and in their clear gray depths, she saw their future. It wouldn't be built on a lie or a contract or a faded photograph. It would be built right here, under the vast Arizona sky, with their own two hands. A foundation of honesty, respect, and a love as strong and resilient as ancient oak. He had sent for a fragile bride, but fate had delivered him a woman who shattered his expectations, saved his legacy, and captured his heart. And neither of them would have it any other way. The story of Beatrice and Jedediah Stone became a quiet legend in the territory, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest treasures are found when our plans fall apart. Theirs was a love not born of a perfect beginning, but forged in deception, crisis, and undeniable truth. It proves that a person's real value isn't in the image they present, but in the strength of their character and the courage in their heart. They didn't just build a ranch, they built a legacy, founded on the beautiful, messy reality of who they truly were. If this story of resilience and surprising love resonated with you, help us share more tales from the heart of the Old West. Please take a moment to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more dramas, adventures, and legends from a time gone by. Thank you for listening.